While my son was praising his perfect wife, my lawyer sent over a warning bulletin from the Belgian police, her face printed right on it. 3 years. That's how long I had lived like a guest in my own home, holding a secret that could destroy everything. My son, Leo, believed he was the master of the Valombre estate. His wife, Isabel, believed it even more. They didn't know that the true deed of ownership was locked in my safe, a testament to the day I had to save this legacy from my own son's collapse. I remained silent, observing. I watched how Isabel, with an angelic smile, systematically replaced my family's heritage with forgeries. I knew the true value of the coin collection that had vanished. I knew the landscape painting in the library was now just a soulless copy. And I knew the sapphire on Isabel's neck was not my mother's stone. My son, in his blindness of love, called it brilliant management. I called it a silent invasion. The question was not whether she was a fraud. The question was, how big was her plan, and when would she make her final move? I had my answer, and I waited, not in fear, but like a hunter waiting for her prey to step into the crosshairs. I needed one mistake, one public, arrogant act that could not be denied. And tonight, at a dinner party staged like a coronation, Isabel decided to bring down the curtain herself. She thought this was her night, the night to assert her absolute power. She didn't know that this was, in fact, my night. When dessert was served, she handed me exactly what I needed. Isabel stood up, lightly tapping her fork against her wine glass. A hush fell over the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice as sweet as honey. "Tonight, I have a special announcement. As you all know, our mother Elena has dedicated her life to traditional values. This Valombre estate, under Leo's and my care, is becoming more modern and dynamic." She paused, looking at me with a smile full of false concern. "I know this change can be unsettling for you, Mother, so we have prepared a gift." She gave a signal, and an assistant brought a brochure and placed it in front of me. The cover showed a small, quaint, and rather remote country cottage. "We have found a lovely little house in the countryside," Isabel continued, her voice dripping with filial devotion. "A quiet, old-fashioned place, perfectly suited to your tastes. You can retire there, away from the hustle and bustle of modern life." The silence in the dining room was now suffocating. This wasn't a gift. It was an eviction notice, wrapped in the cellophane of filial piety. She was publicly declaring that my time was over and that she, as the new mistress, was arranging my future. Leo looked utterly shocked. It was clear he knew nothing of this plan. Isabel looked directly at me, her eyes glinting with a triumphant spark. "I know this is a big decision, but it's time for you to rest. What do you say?" Her arrogance had blinded her. I took a deep breath. I didn't even glance at the brochure. I smiled, a cold, thin smile. "Isabel," my voice rang out, unwavering, "your idea is very thoughtful, but I have to wonder, why did you go to all this trouble?" Isabel was slightly taken aback by my question, but she quickly regained her confidence. She looked at me as if explaining something to a child. "Because it's time for a change, Mother. This place needs a true master, someone with a vision for the future, not someone clinging to the past." Her voice grew sharper, no longer veiled. "To prove who has the right to make decisions here, I need to rearrange things, starting with what is no longer suitable." "And I am that unsuitable thing?" I asked, my voice still calm. "Precisely," she replied, without a hint of hesitation. "You belong to another era. Your presence here holds back Valombre's progress, and Leo's as well. I am doing what's best for this family." Leo shot to his feet, stammering, "Isabel, what are you saying? That's my mother!" But Isabel ignored him. Her gaze remained locked on me, challenging. She was so confident she no longer needed to act. She had publicly declared her intention to remove me to seize power. "Thank you for clarifying," I said, my cold smile deepening. That makes things much easier. But there is a very big problem with your plan. The smile on Isabel's lips froze. I looked her straight in the eye. Because this Vallombra estate, the one you so proudly flaunt on social media, belongs to me. Entirely to me. A murmur rippled around the table. Leo stared at me, his face as white as a sheet. Mother, what are you talking about? I didn't look at him, my eyes still fixed on Isabel, who was beginning to lose her composure. 3 years ago, when Leo's business failed and he could no longer carry this legacy, I used my entire personal fortune to buy it from him. The money you and Leo have been sending me each month. I paused, delivering the final blow. That, my dear girl, is rent. The entire table was stunned into silence. Isabel's face was chalk white. All her plans, all her self-satisfaction, had crumbled in an instant. I stood up, adjusting the shawl on my shoulders. My voice became cold and decisive, repeating the very ultimatum she had just given me, but with a completely different outcome. You and Leo have 30 days. Start looking for somewhere more modern to live. A place that fits the budget of an art curator with no gallery. I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving them to deal with the mess. The storm had only just begun, and I knew this was merely the first act. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the library, Louis's favorite room, and waited. I knew the real storm wouldn't come from Isabel, at least not immediately. She was too smart to act rashly. The storm would come from my own son, from his confusion and his pain. And just as I predicted, as dawn broke, Leo's heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway, followed by an angry knock on the door. He entered, his face haggard after a sleepless night, his eyes red with a mixture of shock and anger. "Why, mother?" His voice broke, filled with hurt. "Why would you humiliate us in front of everyone? Why would you hide the truth about this house from me?" I set down my teacup and looked directly into my son's eyes. My voice held no blame, only the unvarnished truth. "Because I wanted you to feel like the master of Vallombra. Leo, I wanted you to hold your head high, to stand on your own 2 feet after that fall, not to live like a failure being supported by his mother. I gave you dignity." I paused, letting my words sink in. "But dignity cannot be built on disrespect for others, Leo. You heard what Isabel said. She didn't just disrespect me. She wanted to erase my very existence from this house." Leo fell silent, the anger in his eyes slowly replaced by confusion. He knew what Isabel had done was wrong, but he still loved his wife. She was just being too blunt, mother. "She didn't mean it, didn't she?" I asked softly, letting the question hang in the air. That afternoon it was Isabel's turn. She came alone, carrying an expensive bouquet of white peonies. Her perfect face was streaked with tears, her eyes swollen. She sobbed that she had been under too much pressure, that she just wanted to fit in, to prove herself in such a grand family, and that her words last night were because she'd had too much to drink. It was a perfect performance of remorse. I listened in silence. I had seen too many plays in my lifetime to be moved by such a clumsy performance. "I accept your apology," I said when she had finished, my voice even and devoid of emotion. "But the ultimatum still stands. 29 days. The desperation in her eyes vanished for a split second, replaced by a flash of coldness, but it was quickly masked by a fresh sob. A few days later, with the tension in the house still thick, I decided to tidy the living room myself. As I was dusting a bookshelf, my eyes fell upon a small impressionist painting that Isabel had proudly brought home a few months ago. She boasted of having bought it for an unbelievably good price from a private collection. Leo had praised his wife's discerning eye. I took the painting down. As someone who had spent a lifetime around art, I didn't need a magnifying glass. I recognized it instantly. The brushstrokes lacked a master's freedom. The colors were too vibrant, without the depth of age. The layers of oil paint had none of the fine, natural cracks. It was a fake, a clumsy fake. I placed the painting back, but my mind was racing. Why would a savvy art curator like Isabel buy such an obvious forgery? Or was she not deceived at all? She had done it on purpose. Which begged the question, where did the real money Leo gave her for this masterpiece actually go? A small crack had just appeared in the perfect portrait Isabel had so painstakingly painted, and I knew that if I kept prying, the whole canvas would shatter. A small crack had just appeared in the perfect portrait Isabel had so painstakingly painted, and I knew that if I kept prying, the whole canvas would shatter. I didn't have to wait long. The answer came to me in the most unexpected way, not through an antique, but through something utterly modern. A text message. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was reading in the garden when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Isabel. I assumed it was another plea, but when I opened it, I froze. The message was not meant for me. Plan B must be initiated. The old hag is getting suspicious. Meet me at the old cafe. Bring the papers. Every word in the message was like a splash of cold water to my face. The old hag. Plan B. The papers. This was not the language of a remorseful daughter-in-law. This was the language of a conspirator. I immediately took a screenshot, then calmly texted back a single sentence. Perhaps you sent this message to the wrong person, Isabel. Less than 10 minutes later, Isabel burst into the house without knocking. Her perfect hair was a mess, her face drained of all color. Pure panic. Mother, I can explain, she panted. I sat calmly in my chair, setting my book down, my phone still in my hand. I said nothing, simply holding up the screen with the message for her to see. Her eyes locked onto it, and then she collapsed onto the floor, tears streaming down her face. Another performance, but this one was more desperate. She concocted a tragic tale of a dark past, of an old gambling debt she was trying to hide from Leo. The man in the text, she claimed, was an old friend helping her resolve things quietly. The papers were merely loan agreements. Please, Mother, she sobbed, crawling to my feet. Please don't tell Leo. It would destroy him. I was only trying to protect him. She was a very convincing actress, but I was no longer a naive audience member. My life's intuition told me this was a lie hastily constructed to cover up a much larger truth. If it was just an old debt, why call me the old hag? Why was there a plan B? And most importantly, what papers were so important they had to be exchanged in secret? I looked down at my crying daughter-in-law, but I felt no sympathy, only a cold resolve. Her mask had slipped, revealing a conspiracy I still didn't fully understand, and I knew I had to uncover the truth before her plan B could be executed. I didn't believe a word Isabel said. Her performance might have fooled Leo, but it couldn't fool me. As soon as she left, I acted. I knew the cafe she mentioned. It was a discreet place in the next town over. I drove there, sat in my car across the street, and waited. Half an hour later, Isabel arrived, followed by a tall, well-dressed man. He looked nothing like a debt collector. I quietly raised my phone and took several clear photos of his face as they exchanged a folder. That evening, I sent the photos to Bernard, my late husband's old friend. He was not only our family lawyer, but also had extensive connections in private security across Europe. I made one simple request. Bernard, find out who this man is. 2 days later, the answer arrived. Not as a phone call, but as an email with an encrypted attachment. Bernard had written only one line. Elena, sit down before you open this file. My heart pounded as I opened the dossier. The information on the screen made me forget to breathe. The man in the photo was named Julien Dubois. He was not a lover, nor a creditor. He was Isabelle Dubois's biological brother. But that wasn't the most horrific part. Below his personal information was a scanned article from an old Belgian newspaper. The headline read, "Warning, Sibling duo of grifters targeting wealthy families. I read every word, and my world tilted on its axis. The article detailed Isabel and Julian's modus operandi. Isabel, with her beauty and education, would approach and charm single men, usually naive, trusting heirs. Meanwhile, Julian, posing as a financial expert or investor, would provide support from the shadows. They specialized in creating perfect romances and marriages, through which they would slowly drain the victim's assets via phantom investments, inflated invoices, and selling off valuable items. Everything suddenly became painfully clear. Leo's entire marriage was a sham. Isabel's approach to my son, their love, it was all part of a meticulously calculated scam. The fake painting, the swapped necklace, the undersold coin collection. These weren't isolated acts of greed. They were systematic steps to drain our finances. And I realized their final target wasn't just trinkets. Their final target was the entire Valombre estate, my family's entire legacy. I sat frozen in front of the computer, a wave of disgust and pain washing over me. My son hadn't just married a bad woman. He had fallen into the trap of professional criminals. And I, by keeping the house's ownership a secret, had inadvertently become the final obstacle they hadn't anticipated. The plan B they mentioned was likely their plan to deal with me. I had no choice. This truth, however cruel, was something Leo had to know. I called my son to the library, the room that had now become the heart of our battle. I didn't say much. I just quietly turned the computer screen towards him. It was all there. The photo of Isabel meeting Julian, his identity file, and the Belgian newspaper article with the highlighted headline. I also placed another folder beside it that Bernard had helped me compile. Copies of Isabel's secret bank statements, showing large sums being transferred out every time a family antique was sold or restored. Leo stared at the screen. At first, there was confusion, then disbelief, and finally a quiet devastation. He didn't scream or break things. He just sank into a chair, put his head in his hands, and his body began to tremble. The wife he adored, the woman he had defended so fiercely to me, was an illusion. His entire marriage, his love, was a perfectly laid trap. I saw the innocence in my son's eyes shatter, leaving behind a profound pain and shame. I've been such a fool, he whispered, his voice broken. I placed a hand on his shoulder. You weren't a fool, Leo. You were trusting. Now, we must end this. The next day, Isabel and Julian arrived at the estate together. Clearly, they had no idea I knew everything. They thought I was just a lonely old woman who could be easily intimidated or bought off. They had come to execute Plan B. They walked into the living room, Julian holding a folder. Isabel began her tearful act again. Mother, I beg you, she sobbed. I know you're angry, but please think of Leo. Julian just wants to help us sort things out. If you just sign these papers, agreeing to transfer part of the ownership to Leo, the bank will give us a loan to start over. I calmly cut her off, my voice like ice. Help you complete your 8th scam. Is that it, Miss Dubois? The colour drained from both of their faces. The name Dubois that I had just uttered was like a thunderclap. Their performance shattered. Isabel stammered. Mother, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the families in Belgium, in the Netherlands, I continued, rising to face them. I'm talking about the people you have deceived, whose lives you have ruined. Valombre will be your final stop. Julian started to say something, perhaps a threat, but just then, the grand doors to the living room swung open. Police Chief Antoine, an old friend of my husband's, entered with 2 officers. Leo stood right behind him, his eyes no longer weak, only filled with cold determination. Isabel and Julian Dubois, Chief Antoine said, his voice firm. You are under arrest for organized fraud. At the request of the Belgian police, and based on a formal complaint from the Valombre family. Pure panic flashed across Isabel's face. All her calculations, all her confidence, evaporated. The sight of her being handcuffed and led away from the Valombre estate, past the portraits of my ancestors, was the final curtain on her fraudulent play. The door slammed shut, returning a long-lost peace to the house. After the police left, a deep silence fell over the Valombre estate. But it was no longer the heavy silence of secrets and tension. It was the quiet of a storm that has passed, when the air is clean and everything has been washed away. For the first time in years, I felt I could take a deep breath in my own home. A few weeks later, as the legal proceedings were settling, I found Leo sitting alone in the garden. It was a late spring afternoon. Golden sunlight streamed over the lavender beds that were beginning to bud, and the hills of Provence looked gentle in the distance. He no longer had the devastated look from that day, but a sadness still lingered in his eyes. I sat down beside him without a word. We watched the familiar landscape in shared silence. After a long while, it was Leo who spoke, his voice hoarse. "I've spent the whole week going over everything. The invoices, the emails. How could I have been so blind?" "It wasn't blindness, Leo," I said softly. "It was love. You loved a portrait she painted, not the real person." He nodded, a single tear rolling down his cheek. "I've lost a wife. I've lost 3 years of my life." "No," I took his hand. "You've lost an illusion. But you found yourself again. You found Valombre again. And you have found our connection again." He looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the gaze of my little boy again, a look full of trust and gratitude. We didn't need to say anything more. The wound was still there, but it would heal. The mending had begun. As I stood alone in the dining room that evening, looking up at the portrait of Louis, my husband, I smiled. Isabel had been right about one thing. You cannot cling to the past forever, but it is not something to be thrown away either. It is the foundation upon which we build the future. The legacy of Valombre is not just land or old paintings. It is the resilience forged over generations. It is the wisdom to know what is real and what is fake, not just in antiques, but in people's hearts. And sometimes, to protect what is most true, you must be ruthless with the things that are false. The battle was over. Valombre was at peace. And I, Elena de Valombre, its guardian, could finally rest. 67, 8 seconds. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn. Enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat.